My name is Destiny Mitchell. I'm 42 years old, and I thought being a hardworking single mother would earn respect from my community until my neighbors looked at my unmown lawn and said, Destiny's yard is a disgrace. What happened next proved that while I was working two jobs to support my three children and maintain a loving home, my perfectionist neighbors were filing false reports with Child Protective Services because they thought my landscaping reflected my parenting abilities. Before I tell you how one home visit from a social worker changed everything, my neighbors thought they knew about my family and how CPS records exposed a household so well run it became a model for other families. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear how four words, cleanest, most loving home, silenced an entire neighborhood and made my accusers realize they had reported an exemplary mother for having dandelions in her front yard. Let me take you back to where this story really begins. I've been a single mother for 6 years, ever since my ex-husband decided that family responsibilities weren't compatible with his desire to find himself and moved to another state without providing child support or maintaining contact with our children. I have 3 kids, Emma, 15, Tyler, 12, and little Sophie, 8. They're good kids who help around the house, do well in school, and understand that we all have to work together to make our family function on one income. I work as a medical billing specialist at a local clinic during the day and pick up evening shifts as a bookkeeper for a small business 3 nights a week. Between the two jobs, I'm able to cover our mortgage, utilities, groceries, and the basic expenses of raising 3 children alone. It's not easy, but we make it work. The kids and I have a good system where everyone has age-appropriate chores, homework gets done after dinner, and we spend quality time together on weekends doing free activities like hiking, library visits, or playing games at home. Our house is a modest 3-bedroom ranch in a middle-class neighborhood where most families have 2 parents and significantly higher incomes than ours. We bought the house when I was still married, and I've managed to keep up with the mortgage payments despite the financial challenges of single parenthood. The house itself is well maintained inside. It's clean, organized, and filled with the kind of comfortable chaos that comes with 3 active kids. We have family photos on the walls, books everywhere, and a kitchen table that serves as homework station, craft center, and family meeting space. But our yard is where things get complicated. Maintaining a perfectly manicured lawn and garden requires time, money, and energy that I simply don't have as a single working mother. Between my 2 jobs and my kids' needs, yard work often falls to the bottom of my priority list. This means that sometimes our grass grows a little longer than the neighborhood standard before I have time to mow it. Sometimes weeds appear in our flower beds before I can pull them. Sometimes our fall leaves don't get raked as quickly as our neighbors would prefer. It's not that I don't care about our yard's appearance, it's that I care more about my children's needs, our financial stability, and maintaining a warm, loving home than I care about having magazine-perfect landscaping. But in our neighborhood, landscaping standards appear to be taken very seriously by some residents. My next-door neighbors, Richard and Helen Patterson, are both retired and spend enormous amounts of time and money maintaining their yard. Their lawn looks like a golf course, their flower beds are worthy of a botanical garden, and every hedge is trimmed with mathematical precision. The Pattersons have made it clear from the day I moved in that they consider property maintenance to be a moral issue rather than just an aesthetic preference. Property values depend on everyone maintaining high standards, Richard told me during one of our early interactions. When one house looks neglected, it affects the whole neighborhood. I do my best to keep up with the yard work, I replied diplomatically. But with 3 kids and 2 jobs, it's challenging to find time for everything. Well, we all have to make choices about our priorities, Helen added meaningfully. The implication was clear. They believed I was choosing to neglect my yard rather than being legitimately overwhelmed by more pressing responsibilities. Over the years, the Pattersons have made increasingly direct comments about our yard's appearance. Your grass is getting quite long again, Richard would observe when he saw me checking the mail. Those weeds in your flower bed are starting to spread, Helen would mention when she happened to encounter me outside. You might want to consider hiring a lawn service if you don't have time to maintain the property yourself, Richard suggested during one particularly passive-aggressive interaction. But lawn services cost money I don't have, and weekend yard work competes with grocery shopping, laundry, children's activities, and the dozens of other tasks required to keep our household functioning. The situation escalated last spring when dandelions appeared in our front yard. I was planning to address them when I had a free weekend, but the Pattersons decided to take more direct action. "Destiny, those dandelions are spreading to our yard," Richard informed me one morning as I was leaving for work. "They're becoming a real problem." "I'm planning to take care of them this weekend," I replied, though I wasn't sure if I'd actually have time given Tyler's soccer game and Sophie's birthday party. "This weekend might be too late," Helen added. "Dandelions spread very quickly once they go to seed." "I'll do my best," I said, getting into my car to go to work. But that weekend, Tyler came down with the flu. Sophie's birthday party required more preparation than expected, and I spent Sunday evening at the emergency room with Tyler when his fever spiked. The dandelions waited another week. This pattern continued through the spring and summer. I would plan to address yard work, but children's needs, work requirements, or household emergencies would take priority, and the landscaping tasks would get postponed. Each delay prompted more pointed comments from the Pattersons and increasingly disapproving looks from other neighbors who seemed to view our imperfect yard as evidence of deeper problems with our family. "I don't understand how someone can just let their property go like that," I overheard Helen telling another neighbor during a conversation across our fence. "It shows a lack of respect for the community. It's really quite selfish," Richard added. "The rest of us work hard to maintain our properties, and then one house brings down the whole neighborhood." These conversations hurt because they reduced my family's worth to the height of our grass and the presence of weeds in our flower beds. The criticism reached a new level this fall, when I fell behind on raking leaves. October had been particularly challenging. Emma needed help with college application essays, Tyler was struggling with a difficult math unit, and Sophie had been having nightmares that required extra bedtime attention. By November, our front yard was covered with fallen maple leaves that I hadn't had time to rake. "This is getting ridiculous," I heard Richard tell Helen one morning when they thought I couldn't hear them. "That yard looks completely abandoned." "Something needs to be done," Helen replied. "This level of neglect reflects poorly on all of us." I knew they were talking about our family, and I felt ashamed that my inability to keep up with yard work was causing neighborhood tension. But I also felt frustrated that my neighbors were judging my entire worth as a person and parent based on landscaping maintenance, rather than considering the loving, stable home I was providing for my children despite significant challenges. The situation came to a head 3 weeks ago when I received a phone call that changed everything. "Miss Mitchell, this is Karen Williams from Child Protective Services," the caller said. "We've received a report of possible neglect at your residence, and we need to schedule a home visit to investigate." My blood ran cold. Someone had reported me to Child Protective Services. "What kind of neglect are you investigating?" I asked, my heart racing. "The report suggests that your children may be living in unsanitary conditions and that you may not be adequately supervising their care," Karen explained professionally. "Who made this report?" I asked. "I can't provide the identity of the reporting party," Karen replied, "but I can tell you that the concerns raised include property maintenance issues that may indicate broader neglect of the children's needs." Property maintenance issues. Someone had called CPS because of my yard work. "When do you need to visit?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "I can come by tomorrow afternoon if you're available," Karen said. "I'll need to inspect the living conditions, interview the children, and assess the overall safety and care situation." That evening, I sat my kids down to explain what was going to happen. "A social worker is coming to visit our house tomorrow," I told them. "Someone made a report that suggested we might not be taking good care of each other." "What does that mean?" Sophie asked, looking worried. "It means someone thinks I might not be a good mom, or that our house might not be a safe place for you to live," I explained honestly. Emma looked outraged. "That's ridiculous. You're an amazing mom." "Who would report us?" Tyler asked. "I don't know for sure," I replied, though I had strong suspicions about the Pattersons' involvement. "But we don't have anything to hide. Our house is clean, we take care of each other, and we'll show the social worker what our real life is like." The next afternoon, Karen Williams arrived for the CPS investigation. She was a professional woman in her 40s who seemed thorough but fair in her approach to the visit. "I'll need to tour the house, speak with each child privately, and assess the overall living situation," Karen explained. Of course, I replied. We have nothing to hide. Karen spent the next 2 hours conducting the most thorough inspection of our home that I had ever experienced. She checked the cleanliness of the bathrooms, looked inside our refrigerator and pantry, examined the children's bedrooms, and assessed the overall safety and organization of our living space. She also interviewed each of my children separately, asking them about their daily routines, their relationship with me, their school performance, and whether they felt safe and cared for at home. During the inspection, Karen took detailed notes and seemed increasingly surprised by what she was finding. Miss Mitchell, she said after completing her assessment, I need to ask you about the nature of the report that brought me here. What do you mean? I asked. The report suggested that your children might be living in unsanitary conditions with inadequate supervision, Karen explained. But what I'm finding is quite different from those allegations. She pulled out her notepad and began reading from her observations. Your house is exceptionally clean and well organized. Your children are articulate, well cared for, and clearly have a strong, loving relationship with you. Their bedrooms are tidy, their clothes are clean, and they speak positively about their home life and your parenting. Karen continued. Your refrigerator and pantry are well stocked with healthy food options. Your children are up to date on medical and dental care. They're performing well in school and participating in age-appropriate activities. What does that mean for the investigation? I asked. It means that the allegations in the report appear to be completely unfounded, Karen replied. In fact, this is one of the cleanest, most loving homes I've visited in my 15 years as a social worker. I felt relief flooding through me, but also anger at whoever had put my family through this ordeal. Miss Mitchell, can you think of any reason someone might have filed a false report about your family? Karen asked. I think it might be related to our yard maintenance, I said hesitantly. Your yard maintenance? Karen looked confused. Our neighbors have been critical of our landscaping standards, I explained. I work 2 jobs and sometimes fall behind on mowing the lawn or raking leaves. I think someone may have assumed that poor yard maintenance means poor childcare. Karen looked incredulous. Someone called CPS because your yard isn't perfectly maintained? That's my best guess, I replied. Miss Mitchell, I want you to understand something important, Karen said, her tone becoming serious. Filing false reports with Child Protective Services is illegal. If someone made allegations about child neglect based on landscaping preferences, they have committed a crime. What happens now? I asked. I'm closing this case immediately with a finding of unfounded allegations, Karen explained. I'm also documenting that this appears to be a case of false reporting, which will be forwarded to law enforcement for potential prosecution. You're referring this for prosecution? I asked. False CPS reports waste resources that should be used to help children who are actually in danger, Karen replied firmly. More importantly, they cause significant trauma to families who are falsely accused. Whoever made this report needs to understand the serious consequences of their actions. After Karen left, I felt a mixture of relief and anger. Relief that my children and I had been completely vindicated, but anger that we had been put through this trauma because of my neighbor's obsession with perfect landscaping. The next morning, I was working in my garden, ironically, finally getting caught up on some yard work, when Richard Patterson approached me from across the fence. Destiny, I saw a government car at your house yesterday, he said with poorly concealed curiosity. Is everything all right? Everything is fine, I replied coolly. It looked like some kind of official visit, Richard pressed. I hope there weren't any problems. I looked at Richard directly and decided to tell him exactly what had happened. Someone filed a false report with Child Protective Services claiming that my children were neglected, I said clearly. The social worker investigated and found that the allegations were completely unfounded. Richard's face went pale. A CPS report? That seems quite serious. It is serious, I replied. Especially since the social worker determined that the report was filed falsely, which is a crime that's being referred for prosecution. Prosecution? Richard stammered. Filing false reports with CPS is illegal, I explained. The social worker said whoever made the report could face criminal charges for wasting resources and traumatizing my family. Richard looked genuinely frightened by this information. I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding, he said weakly. The social worker called it one of the cleanest, most loving homes she'd visited in 15 years. I continued. She said the only possible motive for the false report was someone confusing yard maintenance with child welfare. Richard couldn't meet my eyes. I hope whoever filed the report understands that they're now under investigation themselves, I concluded. 2 days later, Helen Patterson approached me in our driveway. Destiny. Richard and I wanted to apologize, she began nervously. We may have made some comments about your yard that were taken out of context by other neighbors. What kind of comments? I asked. We just mentioned that the property maintenance had been inconsistent, Helen said carefully, but we never intended for anyone to think there were problems with your parenting. Helen, did you or Richard call Child Protective Services about my family? I asked directly. We were concerned about the children, Helen admitted reluctantly. The yard conditions made us wonder if there might be other issues we couldn't see. So you did file the CPS report? I pressed. We thought we were being responsible neighbors, Richard said, joining the conversation. We didn't know it would turn into such a big investigation. You didn't know that falsely accusing someone of child neglect would result in a big investigation? I asked incredulously. We didn't mean to file a false report, Helen protested. We genuinely thought there might be problems. Based on what evidence? I demanded. Based on the height of my grass and some dandelions in my front yard? We thought those conditions might indicate broader neglect, Richard said weakly. Well, the professional social worker who actually inspected my home found no evidence of any kind of neglect, I replied. In fact, she found the opposite, an exceptionally well-cared-for family living in a clean, loving home. We're sorry, Helen said, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. We didn't realize we were wrong about the situation. You're not just wrong, I said firmly. According to CPS, you've committed a crime by filing a false report. The case is being referred to law enforcement for prosecution. Both Pattersons looked terrified by this information. Prosecution? Richard repeated. We didn't know false reporting was illegal. Well, now you know, I replied. And now you'll have to explain to law enforcement why you thought dandelions in my yard justified traumatizing my children with a CPS investigation. The conversation ended with the Pattersons promising to make things right, though it was unclear what they thought they could do to undo the damage they had caused. 1 week later, I received a phone call from Officer David Chen with our local police department. Miss Mitchell, I'm calling about the false CPS report that was filed against your family, he said. Yes. Karen Williams said she was referring the case for prosecution, I replied. We've completed our investigation, Officer Chen continued. We've determined that Richard and Helen Patterson filed the CPS report based on their dissatisfaction with your property maintenance, rather than any legitimate concerns about child welfare. What are the consequences for them? I asked. They're being charged with filing a false police report, which is a misdemeanor, Officer Chen explained. They'll also be required to pay a fine and complete community service hours with a local child advocacy organization. Community service with child advocacy? I asked. The judge felt it was appropriate for them to learn about real child neglect cases so they can understand the difference between serious welfare concerns and landscaping preferences, Officer Chen replied. 6 months later, our neighborhood dynamic has completely changed. The Pattersons have been notably quiet about everyone's yard maintenance, perhaps having learned that perfect landscaping doesn't indicate perfect parenting, and imperfect landscaping doesn't indicate neglect. Several other neighbors have approached me to apologize for making assumptions about my family based on our yard's appearance. I'm sorry I judged your parenting based on your lawn, my neighbor across the street told me. I realize now how ridiculous that was. I should have offered to help instead of criticizing, another neighbor admitted. You're doing an incredible job raising those kids on your own. The CPS report ultimately had an unexpected positive outcome. It provided professional validation that despite my imperfect yard, I was providing excellent care for my children. Karen Williams even contacted me a few months later to ask if I would be willing to speak to other single parents about managing family responsibilities. Your home was such a positive example of a loving, well-run household, she told me. I'd love for other parents to see that you can prioritize your children's needs, even when other aspects of life feel overwhelming. The woman whose neighbors said her yard is a disgrace learned that professional child welfare experts can distinguish between landscaping problems and parenting problems, and that false accusers face real consequences for their assumptions. My children learned that they are loved, well cared for, and living in a home that meets the highest standards for child welfare, regardless of what our dandelions might suggest to judgmental neighbors. And my accusers learned that filing false CPS reports based on aesthetic preferences is not just morally wrong but legally prosecutable, with consequences that extend far beyond community gossip. Today, our yard still isn't perfect, but our home is full of love, our children are thriving, and our neighbors have learned to mind their own business about matters that are none of their concern. Sometimes the cleanest homes aren't the ones with the most manicured lawns, but the ones where children feel safe, loved, and supported by parents who prioritize what actually matters. Have you ever been judged by neighbors who confused appearance with reality? How do you handle people who think they can assess your worth based on superficial observations? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about false accusations, community judgment, and learning that real family values can't be measured by lawn maintenance standards.